Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. This is the show where between my guest interviews with subject matter experts and topic-specific deep dives, the aim is to arm you with actionable insights and information on how to prioritize your metabolic health and improve your overall health and well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Plessis, and I am back with the fantastic Mr. Neill Friedman for what is episode 3 in our collaborative mini-series. Neill, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Neill, in the last episode, you took us through the process of how the average person can think like a scientist without being one. Sort of crash course in critical thinking, as it were, which is fantastic. And then the first episode before that, which obviously people would be encouraged to go back and have a look at episodes 1 and 2 if they haven't already. We covered the sort of overarching framework of what we're going to be discussing across the mini-series, as it were, and how your body uses energy and the different sort of levels of the word has just jumped right out of my brain.
Different priorities that we give to our bodies, give to our different energy systems. Is that what
you're referring
to?
It's the funny word for non-negotiable, but basically, like your body uses energy for certain processes. Yes, and those are essential, and there's non-negotiable, so those will always be prioritized, and then there's step downs from there. And energy is cascaded accordingly, but the essential things are always on, basically. And that was a fantastic episode, and again, people can go back and have a listen to it. Highly encourage that. But for today, we are going to delve into the murky, dark waters of nutrition. So, with that, I hand over to you, and let's dive right in.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ricky. So we said that we were going to call this episode Nutrition 101. And I also want to remind the viewers of what we said we were going to do at the start of episode 1, because that's going to come into effect for this episode and the next, is we said we want to try and keep things really simple. Nutrition is a complex subject. I think I pointed this out to you prior, but if you look at the bookshelf behind me, the last 3 or 4 books there are all different nutrition books: sports nutrition, health nutrition, nutrition over lifestyle. None of them is less than, 700-800 pages long.
Yeah.
It's heavy, it's complex, and many times I think many people who are trying to get social media attention really try to delve into the real sort of niche parts of that, but to try to find a unique perspective to present to an audience around what they can offer. And with all of that out there, I think sometimes we all forget that most people just want the 101. They just want the basics. How do you distill all of that down? So for today's episode, when we talk about nutrition, we said we were going to try and leave people with just 3 different concepts to try one of the 3. The idea is, as we'll position 3 different ways of eating potentially that might improve your metabolic health and your energy systems, with the idea being that the viewers who are new to this would simply try one that seems to fit the most into what they want to achieve and what they think they can do and their goals, and start with that. And then next week in our final episode 4, when we look at physical activity and recovery, we'll try and offer 3 key steps for each of those. So effectively, we will leave the viewers by the end of the fourth episode with a 3x3 grid.
Yes.
Three interventions: nutrition, physical activity, recovery, and then 3 options within each of those. And we think a really good place to start would be to take one from each of those, one off from each of those, and move forward. So when I put the title together for today's episode, we said Nutrition 101. And then I said, my plan with my writing here said, nobody invites you around for nutrients. So I think that's key bit, right? So I've never heard any of my children throughout their growing up say, Mom, Dad, what nutrients are we having for dinner tonight? All right. So
Mhm.
we don't eat nutrients. We eat food. We eat meals.
This episode is brought to you by my work as a Zinzino independent partner. To find out more about Zinzino and their pioneering work in test-based personalized nutrition and how this can help you take the guesswork out of your personal health journey, please have a look at the episode description and complete the short survey linked therein. This episode is also brought to you by my new tech startup, Biosim Technologies. At Biosim Technologies, we are creating intelligent, technology-driven solutions for human metabolic health, empowering individuals to embrace a biology-first approach to their lifestyle, health, and wellness. To keep up to date with our progress at Biosim Technologies, please look at the episode description and join our mailing list, where you will receive periodic updates on the exciting things that we have underway.
But our
Yes.
bodies don't process meals. Our bodies
No.
process nutrients. So
Mhm.
there's a change in what happens in terms of what we eat and then what our bodies use. So I think that's quite important because we hear people, especially the bodybuilders and the gym guys, counting their macros. What's a macro? People seem to forget about their micros. What's a micro? So really, I want to answer some of those questions today in a very basic form and take people through what we mean by nutrition and what is the relationship between food, what we go and buy at the supermarket, and nutrients that our bodies use. So that's really what we want to do. And I want to remind people of a few things that we just said in episode 1, which is that everything we do with our bodies is related to energy, and food
Yes.
and nutrients is around the supply of energy. So we have a supply and demand model. Our bodies work very, very similarly to a good economic system, right? Supply and demand, really important. Demand are the energy systems we covered in episode 1. And our
Mhm.
physical activity is a key way that we can regulate and control demand.
Mhm.
And eating and nutrients is the supply side. It's where we bring things in. So just
Yeah.
in terms of putting a little bit of a recap on some of the ideas around energy, and I'm just going to read some notes here. First one is a quote from one of the gurus in the mitochondrial field that I follow a lot, a chap named Martin Picard. Said the most vital element of life is the flow of energy. All right, so that's really important. Without energy transformation, cellular and organismal life doesn't exist. All right,
Yes.
and what we mean by energy transformation is converting food to nutrients and nutrients into the form of energy that we can use to power ourselves. All right. It's a
Yeah.
molecule called ATP, but basically with just transformation, we're transforming the nutrients into a type of energy that we can use. All right. And very importantly, it's important to know that nothing in biology is free. Every process costs energy and must be funded from a limited budget. All right. And if you put that all together, energy is the most vital currency in the maintenance of well-being. So let's start off
Yes.
with that. So energy is the most vital currency that we have in the maintenance of well-being, and nutrition is all about how do we take that in.
Yes.
All right.
Cool.
So I really wanted to, the first question that I put on paper here. So is what is this relationship between food, nutrition, and health? And what are nutrients? So, sorry, pieces of paper flying everywhere.
That's all good.
So, nutrients, let's start with the very basics. We have nutrients are broken up into two very broad groups, macronutrients and
Mhm.
micronutrients. And that name really says it all. Macro, meaning big, are the three key food groups that we have. And those are proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids or fats. All
Yeah.
right. So when people talk about a macro-based diet, they're talking about the control of those three items.
Mhm.
All three of those macronutrient groups can provide energy into our bodies, but rarely our bodies focus on carbohydrates as a fuel source and fats as an energy source.
Yes.
Proteins can be used as fuel, but only kind of at a last ditch effort. It's quite metabolically challenging. Remember that line about everything having a price. The
Yeah.
price of converting protein to energy is very, very high.
Yes.
So
I have read before that human physiology doesn't do well using protein for energy long term. Like it's not a good answer to the energy equation.
because it uses up so much of the energy in order to convert it into. So basically, it's basically got to take protein and convert it into glucose. So you've got to strip the aminos even further and go through the whole gluconeogenesis process in order to produce glucose out of the proteins before it can then be used as an energy source. And that process, as I say, is expensive. So a lot of the energy you need for energy is being used just to maintain the process. And also you're then using proteins that are probably best for something else. So the main focus, the main reason, the main thing that our body uses proteins for is for building products. Okay, so our tissues and our, all our tissue, muscle tissue, but enzymes and all these processes are all different peptides. They're all different strings of proteins. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas carbohydrates, which is effectively there's three single monohydrates, monocarbohydrates, single molecules, so glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then you got the disaccharides, so things like sucrose, which is the sugar that we eat, is two molecules. It's a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose, right?
Yeah.
Lactose is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of galactose. So those are the two together. But essentially you got the three. And then we've got our lipids, our fats, which come in short chain, medium chain, and long chain fatty acids and triglycerides. And quite simply, and we're not going to go into all the science of it, but the name says it all. Short chain fatty acids are a short chain of molecules, medium chain or medium length chain of molecules, and long chain a long chain. But let's first just talk about this idea of food versus nutrients. So when we process food in terms of eating the food, our bodies go through a process of catabolism and anabolism. What is catabolism and anabolism? Catabolism is breaking down the foods that we eat into the simplest possible nutrients, breaking them up into their molecules. And then those molecules get reassembled, which is anabolism, which is when we build things up. So we eat food in one format, we catabolize it down to its most basic form through our digestive system. And then those individual molecules get rebuilt into different strings. All right. So although there's some interesting questioning and science around this, we'll stick to the basics for the moment. Proteins are generally made up of 21 amino acids, some of which are essential. Our body can't produce them, and nine of which are essential, and then the rest we can make ourselves. All right. However, with those amino acids, we can build. So we can eat protein. We eat some meat or whatever might be, some protein. We catabolize that into its amino acids, and then we can anabolize those amino acids into all sorts of different complex 3D structures that are proteins. I can't remember what the last count was, but everyone knows it's not definitive. But our bodies produce something like 96,000 different proteins out of the 22, 21 amino acids. Right?
So the proteins are best thought of as building blocks then.
The amino acids are building blocks, absolutely. But if you think about that, that's pretty good machinery. You can take everything down to 21 basic ingredients and then build over 96,000 usable, working, functional alternatives using those same ingredients. It's pretty good, right? And then the same thing happens with glucose, with carbohydrates and fats. Our bodies go through a process of breaking down the food that we eat that contain those, and they break them down into those individual molecules, and then we work with those molecules to derive energy and utilize them up. So we eat food, but out of the food, our body takes nutrients, and then we use those nutrients. That's the food to nutrient thing. And the macronutrients, I said, just the three: proteins, carbohydrates, and technically it's lipids, but we most people just refer to lipids as fats. And then you've got your micronutrients, and your micronutrients are your vitamins and minerals. And again, the word micro meaning small. So we need these in much smaller quantities. And the other thing that's really important is that micronutrients don't produce energy.
Yeah.
But micronutrients are very important for creating the other molecules that we need for being able to get and extract the energy from the macronutrients. All right.
Yeah.
So micronutrients themselves don't create energy, but they help. They're vital for being able to release the energy within the foods that we eat. All right?
Yeah, I like that. I
So
think that's an important point to stress because it's so easy for people to get caught up in the energy balance blinkered swim lane of this, and to think about metabolic health as purely just energy balance, but it's not really energy balance. Like that's a major part of it for sure, but there's this other part of it, which is the provision of the essential nutrients that your body needs to do the stuff that it needs to do with energy balance.
absolutely, 100%. And I think the best way to define this is the same way we discovered that. So we being mankind, you know, if you go back to probably just before your time, my time, maybe, no, the voyages of discovery, right? So back when Columbus and these guys were all Magellan and etc. were Vasco da Gama were discovering the new trade routes, etc. What made the sailors sick and what was killing sailors from a health perspective wasn't a lack of macronutrients, all right? It was two key diseases, right? Scurvy and rickets.
Yeah.
Scurvy and rickets come from a lack of vitamin C and a lack of vitamin D in the diet, all right? So the fact that people were getting sick, and people still get sick in poorer countries today, because of a lack of micronutrients, not a lack of macronutrients. And that kind of defines how important it is. And that's kind of quite important, I suppose, for my personal life story, because the way that the Dutch East India Company, your story as well, the way the Dutch East India Company got around this problem once they realized that they needed to have fresh fruit and vegetables on the ships was somewhere between Europe and the East. They decided they needed to build a garden where they could grow fresh vegetables, and the ships could fuel up halfway through their journey on fruit and vegetables. And they settled in Cape Town, which is where I was born, and that's how South Africa first got I'm trying to use words that aren't going to be triggering for some people, but it was the start of the colonization process, right? It's when
It
white
got
people
captured and
arrived in
colonized.
Africa, all right, so in southern Africa. So yeah, I've been at university too long. I'm learning to have to watch my words with everything, right? Okay, but yeah, you know the point. Yeah, so
Yes.
so that was the start of white settlement in southern Africa, and you and I are both
Well,
products of that, I
we're
suppose,
a
at the end of the
result of
day.
that, and yeah,
Yeah,
like
but that's what they were
whilst we
doing.
didn't
They were planting
actively
a garden. The
partake.
gardens still today feature as a tourist feature within Cape Town.
Yeah.
Used to go there often as a kid to feed the squirrels. But that was built by Jan van Riebeeck and the Dutch East India Company to grow fruit and vegetables so they could satisfy the micronutrient needs of the sailors on ships. So it's a really part of our diet, and it's something that I think, as you said, gets lost quite a bit along the way. But it also kind of highlights a few things, that I just need people to be aware of. And I don't want to go too down this route, but vitamins, in their basics, come in two broad groups of vitamins: water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. Water-soluble vitamins are just vitamins B and C. And of course, vitamin B, I'm not going to go through all of this. There's a long range, so niacin and B12. There's a whole range of vitamins in the vitamin B category. And then ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, are the two groups that are water-soluble.
Yeah.
All the other vitamin groups, including vitamin D, vitamin A, are fat-soluble.
Okay.
And this is one of the problems that we picked up when we saw the low fat health messaging that came out of the 50s, and which unfortunately still persists quite a bit today, is when we started to cut fat out of people's diets. Suddenly the fat soluble vitamins in food weren't being absorbed, because you need to have some fat in the diet to absorb the fat soluble micronutrients
Well,
that are
even
in
just to
those foods.
provide them, because you're not finding the fat soluble vitamins in the
But
sort of vegetables.
if you take a fortified product, I'm going to just pick on one. Let's say low fat yogurt. Yogurt, as I grew up saying, yogurt since I've been in the UK. You take low fat yogurt. Yogurt Garage, and there's one other, Garage Garage. Yeah, words that I realize that I've changed the way I speak in the 20-odd years that I've been here. You take low fat yogurt and you fortify it. So you say it's full of good healthy vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, etc. But then you take out the fat that's in there. It doesn't matter how much vitamin D or how much vitamin A is in that yogurt. You're not going to absorb very much of it at all, because if you haven't got fat to go with it, it's a fat. The name is there. It's a fat-soluble vitamin.
Yeah, you're impeding
so that's
the
just one of the
digestion and
watchwords.
Absorption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then the other thing that I want to touch on as a broad category before we sort of go down specific into diets is this idea of detox diets or detoxicity. And this just touches on a broad range of other things. So what do we mean when we say something is toxic for us? What is that idea of toxin? And I remember the very first day, or my very first nutrition lecture that I had at university back in 2018. My lecturer introduced me to a French chap named Paracelsus, who I think it's Paracelsus 1745. I'm really stretching my memory now, but around there. But Google him if anybody's interested. But Paracelsus is considered the father of modern toxicology. And in fact, he gave us two very important things in the world. One was that his first name was Bombus. It wasn't even his real name. He changed it because he modeled himself after somebody else. So his name was Bombus Paracelsus. And for all intents and purposes, he was quite a smug, arrogant, self-important person. And the word bombastic in the English language comes from him. So when you're describing somebody as being bombastic, you mean he was a bit like Bombus Paracelsus. So there's a bit of trivia for the listeners.
Yeah. Never knew that.
But he's considered the father of modern toxicology. He studied poisons. And to sum up his life's work in one sentence, and I'd have to paraphrase because he said it in French. Basically, his description of toxins was everything and nothing is a toxin depending on dose.
Yes.
And we need to think about that quite carefully. Basically, every single thing that comes into our body, I was going to say ingest, but it's also what we breathe, what we touch, etc., has the potential to be a toxin. And what makes it toxic is not the substance itself, but the amount of it. And obviously, we have different tolerance levels for different things. So if you go onto things like the Linus Pauling website, or the NHS micronutrient website, which is a very good website, by the way, you can go into each and every, and you can just Google those. But if you go into each and every micronutrient, it has a minimum daily amount and it has a maximum daily amount. All right. Now, as is with everything with nutrition, some of those things are very much debated. So I would agree with all the consensus that says the maximum amount of vitamin D is probably far too low. We should probably be having a much higher dose than what's recommended. But the point is that everything becomes toxic after a point. Again, let's throw in some trivia here. We look at everyone's followed the story of Scott of the Antarctic. Right. Whereas one of the weird things that they discovered about Scott of the Antarctic is when they discovered their bodies, or the people there, they found that many of them had an ailment or a disease associated with exceptionally high levels of, I think it was vitamin A. I could be wrong on this. Someone probably needs to check me. But the problem that was, so we hear about eating organ meat, and organ meat being very good for you, in particular liver, and I do love liver, and it's very good for you, very rich in vitamin A.
In excess.
But when they were starving in Scotland and Antarctic, they killed polar bears. Polar bear liver is so rich in vitamin A that it will kill you.
It's toxic. Yeah.
All right? It
Yeah,
will make it's toxic.
It'll
Right?
poison you and you will die.
Absolutely. So there's the first words. I know polar
That's
bears
a
probably don't have any problems with eating us, but for us, we shouldn't probably really be eating them from a health perspective.
yeah, and that's
All right.
that's a common debate that I have within the carnivore circles a lot as well, because many people of the persuasion of what's the twit's name? Brian Johnson or Liver King. Just like pounds and pounds of liver every day, eating it raw, blah blah blah, all for show. It's drama, is what that is. He's selling entertainment. But if you genuinely eat organ meat in those levels consistently over time, you're going to do yourself a disservice, because you have cumulative dose toxicity at some point. Like, it will catch up with you and you'll have problems, especially with the fat soluble vitamins, because they don't flush like our water soluble vitamins do. They accumulate.
You'd have a very hard time overdosing on vitamin C, because you just pee most of it away, which is why when you take most vitamin C supplements and you go to the loo, you get this bright yellow.
Yes.
Absolutely. Unless you have a deficiency. If for some reason or other you have a deficiency, then there's a need. So
yeah,
that's that. I think it's probably worth noting as a good reminder there, thanks, is when we talk about diet and health, please note that if anyone listening suffers from any form of serious illness, major problems, then anything that we say which pertains to the general populace, if you want to try and follow any of this, it's probably worth having a chat to your doctor first. So if you sit in outside of the scope of, I'm going to use the word normal. I hate that term, but somebody, so if you're on special medication for something, if you have some sort of genetic disorder, if you're not processing certain macronutrients properly, and please make sure that you double check before you implement any of the strategies.
Basically, this is not medical advice. This is just talking science and facts.
And also, you do get specific diet requirements for certain specific ailments, and we're not going down that route now. This is really designed at the normal people, at average people.
Yes.
So let's talk about, I think let's get through, I've got a few things here that I just want to talk about in terms of some broad groups. So when we talk about nutrition, and this is where we're going to get to our 3 points, right? So we can talk about, I'm going to end with talking about ultra processed food. So I'm going to get to that at the end. But really, I want to talk about calorie counting. So what is calorie counting? Is it good? Is it bad? What does it mean for health? I want to talk about ketogenic or low carb diets. I want to talk about intermittent fasting. I want to come back and revisit a bit of that low fat diet idea, which I think we touched on briefly a moment, and we're going to end with ultra processed foods. So the agenda from here forward is just going through those things. So let's start with calorie counting. Calorie counting works on the basic concept of the energy balance model, which basically says energy in equals energy out, or should be matched to energy out in order to maintain weight. So the model is quite simple. If you eat more than you burn, if your supply is higher than your demand, you will store energy and put on weight. If you're more physically active than what you're consuming, in other words, demand is outpacing supply, you should lose weight. That's the energy model, and calorie counting, just calories are a unit of energy, and all calorie counting is being able to count how many calories of energy you're putting in, so you can balance that to the amount of energy you expend if you're trying to use weight loss. Now, actually counting calories is quite a difficult thing. So we've had this massive amount of historic diet groups, etc., that have simplified calorie models into creating food into food groups and giving them points, which is just basically a simplified way of counting calories. Instead of having all the details in kilocalories and kilojoules, kilocalories as kilojoules, etc., they just simply gone and said, if you this, then of course, without naming names, some of them have taken them a step further and put food into groups called rewards and sins. Just calling any food a sin is
some of those have since gone bust, I've heard. So
no, that's the Weight Watchers have gone bust. So let's talk about Weight Watchers, because the thing with the calorie counting model is it's not wrong. At its basic core, it's not wrong. The problem is that its simplicity is its complexity. And the best way I can define that for people is actually through a great comment that I read online when Weight Watchers announced they were going bankrupt. Because the Weight Watchers model is completely and absolutely based on, to lose weight, all you've got to do is eat less and move more.
Yeah.
So when they announced that they were going bankrupt, somebody put on social media, they don't understand why Weight Watchers has gone bankrupt. Surely all they needed to do was increase revenue and decrease costs. And I think for anybody who comes from a business world, you just know that increase revenue and decrease costs is a great concept, but how? And it's that same how, it's complicated, is the same problem with the calorie counting model. All right.
So but
How
my
do
critique
you...
of calorie counting is not, it's a perfectly valid system for manipulating body composition, whether you want to put on mass or lose mass. Perfectly valid system for that. And bodybuilders are a fantastic example of this, because they're the epitome of manipulating human physiology for that purpose. And calorie counting and strict diets is their bread and butter.
And even bodybuilders, when they go through a cut, they don't just drop the calorie count, they drop all the carbs, right?
Correct.
So even they do a macro restriction as well, a carbohydrate restriction for their cut. And then
but
obviously
for metabolic health, the picture is broader than energy balance, as we've touched on a little bit earlier. The
picture is broader, but also just saying to somebody, you got to, especially somebody who's overweight potentially because they've been overeating for an extended period of time, years or decades, just cut calories, ignores the fact that different food groups, different macronutrients stimulate our appetite in different ways. So the best way to cut calories is to cut fats. Why? Because, and again, I'm simplifying here, proteins, 4 calories per gram. Carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram. Fats, 9 calories per gram. So for every gram of fat you cut out, you're cutting out almost double the amount of calories. So when you look at typical calorie counting models, the way that they bring your calorie count down is to reduce the fats in your diet. There's 2 problems with that. Number one, carbohydrates don't make you feel full. There's no satiety within carbohydrates. In fact, quite the opposite. Carbohydrates stimulate hunger. Fats, on the other hand, work through an enzyme, and I'm trying not to be too sciencey here. They work through an enzyme called leptin. All right. And this is the enzyme that's associated with satiety. So you need to eat a lot less fatty foods to feel full. And it's designed to make you feel full. So here's something really interesting. A lot of people don't know this. And this is, again, I'm touching on a different subject, but here's for moms and breastfeeding moms to think about. It's one of the problems that I have with a formula when you're feeding formula. Now, I don't want to get into the whole debate. Obviously, I know there's plenty women out there who would love to be able to breastfeed, and there's reasons that they don't or they can't. I'm not questioning that. But when you formula food, there's a process within breastfeeding which can't be replicated. So when you breastfeed a baby, the milk that comes out of the mother does not come out the same. It's not all the way through. All right. The milk comes out in 2 months. You get what they call the foremilk, which is what comes out first. And the foremilk is very, very rich in sugar, in lactose. All right. It's full of lactose sugar, and that's sweet to the taste. It causes the baby to latch on because it's nice and sweet. And it's carbohydrates, it's sugar. It's designed to stimulate hunger. So it really gets the baby latched on and sucking and bring everything. Quite quickly after that's passed through, the milk gets replaced with the hind milk. And the hind milk has got much lower lactose content, so much lower sugar content, and a much higher fat content. And that is what then makes the baby feel full, gives them the essential nutrients, and it's what gives that baby that blissful look on their face when they're completely settled down, they get ready to fall asleep after having. Just absolutely, all right? So you can see this process of carbohydrates and sugar and fats in that process. The carbohydrates are designed to make you hungry, make the baby drink, get them latched on, etc. And then the fat is all the essential bits that they need, and it's what gives them that feeling of being completely full and nice and blissful. And we don't obviously have that in a formula, right? In a formula, there's the formula, and it goes in, and you don't get that same effect on a baby. So along with all the other health benefits of breastfeeding.
Does the protein come with the foremilk or the hindmilk? Do you know?
There's a mix in both, but the majority of it is with the fats. All right. So there's always protein within that.
I was going to touch on this because I think I may be mistaken, so correct me if I am, but I've read that mammalian milk is a bit of a phenomena because it's one of the only things where if we take the entirety of the milk, so if you were to pump a mother or express, or I forget what they call it, and then go and put that through the little machines that test what all's in there, it's almost equal parts carbohydrate, fat, and protein. And that doesn't really
you mix
happen.
It all up, but that's not the order that it's come out.
If you mix it all up, if you mix it all up, it's almost equal parts carbohydrate, fat, and protein. And that doesn't happen anywhere else in nature, because elsewhere in nature, it's usually protein and fat together, carbohydrates on its own.
Sorry, Ricky, you actually, your signal broke up a little bit there.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, what I was saying is, in mammalian milk, you've got almost equal parts of the 3 macronutrients, whereas elsewhere in nature, in like meats and plants and stuff like that, that doesn't happen. And you'll find protein and fats together generally, and then you'll find carbohydrates on their own.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in that. I'm not going to correct you or things. I'm not sure, but from my understanding, the protein content across the fore and hind milk is pretty evenly distributed, but it's this fat and carbohydrate. So yes, if you took the entire feed and then shook it all up, you'd potentially have an equal mix of each, but that's not the sequence that it comes out of the breast in a natural sequence. So the natural sequence is, it's not exclusive, but it's favoring a much higher lactose sugar content up front, and then a much higher fat content in the bulk of the milk in the second, and that's what I say gets that sense of bliss. So if you extrapolate that and bring that into the context of our historical way of eating or our ancestral way of eating, yes, we ate fruit when we were wandering the plains, but fruit was only available on the vine for a couple of weeks a year. That was our predominant source of sugars, of carbohydrates. So we are programmed that when that sugar was there, just eat it, right? As much of it as you can. Don't get full, because you need that energy store to get you through the long, cold winter, right? So when it was there, just eat as much of it as possible. So there's no satiety involved in eating sugars. So when you tell people, let's go back to calorie counting, okay, what we're going to do is we're actually going to reduce the calories in your food by reducing the fats, because fats have got 9 calories per gram. But because food tastes rubbish when you take the fat out of it, we're going to make it taste good again by replacing the fat with sugars, with carbohydrates, because they're only 4 calories per gram. But the problem is that you're then relying on willpower, and you're providing ammunition against that willpower. You're eating something that's designed to make you hungry.
Yeah, and so, most people will lose that battle, myself included. And in full disclosure, if there's ice cream in the house and I know it's there, it doesn't matter. I can have the most willpower in the world. I can psych myself up for hours. Once I've had a bite of that stuff, it's dead. I will finish the entire tub. It may not all happen at once, but I will not be able to go to sleep and leave it alone. I will come and eat it because it's
we have that in common. I'm an ice cream junkie, especially when the weather is like it is. I love ice cream. So it is sugar weakness. And I have tried. I'm really good at making low carb, or taking traditional recipes and creating a low carb version of them. but there's no low carb version of ice cream. It tastes like ice cream. I'm sorry.
No.
So yeah, I agree with that. So that's calorie counting, and that's so. But as you said, from a body composition point of view, energy balance it's not to be rubbished. If you can find a way of successfully having a lower supply than demand, so your physical activity requirement is higher than the supply you're putting in, and you can maintain that, you will lose weight. All right. And one of the big benefits of all the other diets that we'll talk about is actually they do that for you. All
Yes.
right.
Yeah, but the mechanisms are important.
It's the mechanism that's important. So let's have a little look at what we're talking about when we talk about a ketogenic diet. All right. Or a low carb diet. All right. So our bodies have this mechanism, this molecule called ketones. And ketones are involved in the breakdown of fats, and how we can utilize fats and derive from fats, and use that, then produce ketone bodies. Ketone bodies cross the blood-brain barrier, so it becomes an alternative fuel source to glucose. So we need to then, in order to then justify or say why ketogenic diets work, is we need to answer a question. Everyone says there's this thing that glucose is the preferred energy source of the brain, and then the body. So let's wrap that up. So firstly, or let's put that into a context of why we think that. The reason that we think that is if we put glucose into our body, along with fats and any other energy source, our bodies will use the glucose first. Does that mean it's the preferred energy source? I would argue, this is part of my research that I'm doing. No. What I'm saying is, remember what I said earlier, everything and nothing is a toxin. All right. Circulating glucose, that is glucose in our blood supply, is a toxin. It is causing us harm. So what our bodies are trying to do is use glucose as an energy first to get it out of our bloodstream.
100%. Yeah. See,
right,
we're talking about glycation there. Yeah. So
glycation and advanced glycation
and
end products, ages.
Yeah.
It just causes chronic inflammation. So glycation, and as it ages, all the bits and pieces that we associate with atherosclerosis, I can never say that word properly, but the buildup of inflammatory plaques in our blood vessels that ultimately lead to heart disease, high blood pressure and heart disease. So yes, our body will use circulating glucose first, not because it prefers it, but because it's trying to get it out of our bloodstream as fast as possible. It either wants to burn it up as energy and use it immediately, and if we're not using it up immediately, convert it into glycogen, which is the way our body stores glucose. So we can store glycogen in all our muscles, and we can store then additional glycogen in our liver. If our muscles and our liver are full, they've got no more capacity to take up glycogen, then we go through the process of lipogenesis, where we turn that glucose into fat, and we then store that away as fat.
Yeah, because the glycogen reserves are actually quite limited, which I was surprised by. They're not. I mean, obviously, the more muscle you have, the more glycogen reserve you'll have. But they're not.
That's a really important point.
It's not an endless pool. So you get to a point where your glycogen reserves are full, and then it has to go back and get converted into triglycerides, and then get stored away as fat.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is to answer kind of a point that I was trying to get to now, which is, why is it that a bodybuilder can eat so much more carbohydrates when they're in a bulking phase without putting on weight? And it's because the bigger the muscle, the bigger the glycogen storage area that they've got to lock away glycogen before it has to go through the rest of that process. All right. So that is another reason for going to the gym and physical activity and the stuff that we'll talk about in the next episode. More muscle mass you have, you don't have to be a bodybuilder, you don't have to bulk, but the more muscle mass you have, the more storage reserve you've got for glycogen, which is a healthier way to store glycogen or glucose than storing it as fat. Yes. So we do that. And then, of course, we get to the point where we've had so much sugar in our diets that actually we then stop being able to take that up into either our liver or all our muscles, all right? And that's when we start to get what's called insulin resistance. And we've all heard about this. It's the first marker of being pre-diabetic and ultimately diabetic. Again, without being too sciencey on the subject, just very quickly, basically all our muscles have little glucose transporters, all our tissues, all our cells have glucose transporters, and those transporters need to be open. It's called them a doorway that allows the glucose in the blood to be taken up by the cells. But to open that door, you need a key, and that key is insulin. So when you eat carbohydrate products, we have a number of enzymes that detect carbohydrates, and the strongest of those is amylase. And the first place that our body produces amylase is in our saliva. All right. So we actually start triggering the carbohydrate digestion process, the catabolic process, the second we put it in our mouth. That's why you've seen so many sports studies for those that are around carbohydrate gels, where people don't actually eat the carbohydrates. They put it in their mouth and they basically chew it and then spit it out. All right. And that starts the process of producing insulin to break down glycogen and convert it back to glucose, etc., without them actually ingesting. It's because the amylase, as soon as you put carbohydrates in your mouth, you start the process. Now, here's something for your listeners. How many of you are salivating right now because of what we're talking about? Right? Our body is programmed to do that. We're talking about sugars. We're talking about something sweet. And just the mental process of thinking about it has probably got your mouth salivating. It's producing amylase. It's now expecting you to put something sweet in your mouth.
That's in for disappointment.
I'm doing it, and I'm talking about it. All right. That's how programmed we are towards it. So that's, so.
Another interesting point. The genetic adaptation that allowed us to start producing amylase in the mouth first is actually quite recent. It's not been with us for all that long. It's, from what I've read, it's an adaptation that we've gained since the dawn of agriculture, where we shifted our dietary patterns from the traditional hunter-gatherer patterns to a more carbohydrate-heavy, agriculture-based dietary pattern. And getting back to your point about your body trying to get glucose out of the blood as quickly as possible, because free glucose in the blood is toxic because it mixes with the oxygen in the blood, and the result is glycation. That adaptation is not a sign that the increased carbohydrate yield in post-agricultural diets is beneficial. It's an adaptation to try and make sure that we're getting that toxic level of glucose out of the blood as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the fact that it's fairly recent from an evolutionary point of view, I hadn't heard that before, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, readers can feel free to double check me and correct me there. In fact, I'll do the same and I'll put it in the show notes. But I remember from the writing of my book, there was one of the things that came up, and I've done an article on it before as well, where the production of amylase in the mouth is not, it's misconstrued as a sign that, yes, carbohydrates are good and we should eat more. Look how we've adapted for it. But in fact, it's not that we've adapted for it because that's good. We've adapted for it because we need to get it out of the blood quicker.
Right. Yeah. I'll take you down a very quick. I love tangents. This show's going to go on forever. But something just very recent. So for those who don't know, haven't seen my bio, I study mitochondria. That's my thing. And one of the new things that we're seeing in mitochondrial science at the moment is this idea of mitochondrial transfer, where inside an organ we can transfer, our cells transfer mitochondria from healthy cells to cells that are damaged or being attacked by a pathogen to help them recover. So there's a number of ways. So within cells that are close to each other, it forms a little tubule, a little tunnel between the two cells, and streams its mitochondria down. We can also pass mitochondria right across our bodies through our blood. So we put mitochondria into our blood, not for energy. It doesn't get used. They're in a used form, but we can pass mitochondria manufactured in our livers, and we can move it to other parts of the body where there's an injury. But a very, very recent study, and this is just where this comes from, has now shown that we seem to have a high level of this mitochondria in our saliva as well. And we think that this is why an animal will lick a wound. Potentially, obviously, it's actually putting healthy mitochondria into the damaged wound to help the healing process. It's also why when you cut your finger or something, you might stick it in your mouth straight away. Mitochondrial thing. But I have a little theory behind this, a little hypothesis, and this is just my thought. But if this is true, always in remembering that mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to child, right? So your mitochondrial DNA is always from your maternal line. So your mother's DNA is the same DNA as yours, and that's why kissing a child better when they hurt themselves makes them get better.
See, all the ladies listening to this will love that.
Passing her mitochondria potentially in the same way that a female dog will lick the wound of its puppy. So
what you're saying, Neill, is that it's not that my beard is the issue that renders my wife's kissing better more effective than my kissing better. It's because she's passing her mitochondria. That makes perfect sense. I'm going to stick with that.
Absolutely. All right. And if you want to take that one step further, when we kiss from a romantic perspective, before reproducing, potentially this is a mechanism by which we're actually testing if our mitochondria is compatible. Why do some women say, oh, he's a great kisser straight away? And the same male might be considered not a great kisser for somebody else. Maybe, and this is just my hypothesis, there's no science behind this, folks. But maybe there is a mitochondrial test taking place there. With a female going on a subconscious level, okay, our mitochondria are compatible, we can have a child. We can reproduce.
Out of curiosity, is there such a thing as mitochondrial incompatibility between people?
I don't know. Is the straight answer to that question.
We'll stay away from that.
As I say, the science is quite new about mitochondrial transfer in terms of within our cells. And there's only been one paper that published so far that I've seen around this mitochondria in the saliva. So I would say it's very early days of just that science. But intuitively, it feels right to me in terms of why, if we cut ourselves, we'll put it in our mouth. Why do dogs lick a wound? Or why does a cat lick a wound? It's not, there's no antimicrobial quantities to the saliva potentially, but it might be mitochondrial transfer. So yeah, anyway, to get back to our point, because we've digressed. So we're talking about ketogenic diets. The thing I want to talk about ketogenic diets is, what do we mean by ketogenic diet as against a low carb diet? People on a ketogenic diet will typically talk about having somewhere around less than 50 grams of carbs a day to get into a state of ketosis, which is where your body produces ketones as an energy source. That is very different, by the way, of ketoacidosis, which is what we see in severe diabetics. Ketoacidosis will kill you. It's nasty and it's horrible, but very often the anti-keto crowd will confuse
all the time.
Ketosis with ketoacidosis. So just be aware, ketoacidosis, really bad for you. Don't want to have it. Ketosis, good source of energy. People often refer to a keto diet as a fad. Well, people have been treating children with epilepsy with a ketogenic diet since 1916. I think it's the first time it's been documented. So we know that in terms of a lot of neurological disorders, ketogenic diets have been around for a very long time.
It's also the primary metabolic state of a breastfed infant, if I've understood correctly.
Which goes back to our fat in the second part of the milk. But I would say that a ketogenic diet, I like a low carb diet. I like to be. I'm a big practitioner. I think we will get to this around this concept of metabolic flexibility.
Yes.
All right. So the problem that we have with high sugar diets is that we become sugar dependent. We become carbohydrate dependent. Our bodies and our mitochondria and our cells get reprogrammed to be reliant on this constant supply of sugar. And I believe a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, not quite going into a constant state of ketosis, but cutting down your carbs severely, is a great way to restore metabolic flexibility. It doesn't happen overnight if you've never done it before. It is a process. But my thought process is really around that we are really programmed with this use it or lose it concept. And I do think those people that are doing chronic ketogenic diets, so they're on a ketogenic diet for years and years and years, but potentially actually become metabolically dependent the other way around. You'll
Mhm.
very often hear those people saying, oh, I ate a piece of bread today and I felt absolutely sick. Well, you shouldn't feel sick from eating a single slice of bread. All right.
Yeah.
So effectively, their bodies are potentially programmed to be to not know how to process carbs anymore. So
Mm.
my
I actually think
recommendation,
I forget who I was listening to. I want to say it was Pran Yoganathan, who's a gastroenterologist in, I think he's in Sydney or he might be in Perth. I forget. I think it was him. I'm not sure. Maybe it wasn't him. I can't remember now. But the podcast I was listening to, it was a scientist. I think it was Dr. Yoganathan, and he was explaining how in people following a ketogenic diet, the enzyme production responsible for the digestion of carbs shuts down. The body is not a wasteful machine. It's not going to produce enzymes that it doesn't need. If it recognizes that you're not eating, if it's not getting the signals to say that you're eating carbohydrate, it doesn't bother producing amylase. It's not wasteful like that. Those systems shut down and they go dormant. They don't go away, but they go dormant. And then if that person, after a long period of time, goes back to eating a carbohydrate-rich meal, for the first meal or two, they may give themselves some digestive discomfort because the enzymes necessary to digest that are not yet woken back up. It takes the body a while to recognize, oh, we're doing that again. Let me produce some amylase.
so let me go back to that line that I read right at the start of this episode. Nothing in biology is free. Every process costs energy and must be funded from a limited budget. So if you're not using certain enzymes, why waste the energy to produce them? Why waste your energy budget on producing something that's not being utilized? So it switches off. But as you say, it can be switched back on, but it needs time. And for most of us, most people that be listening to this, our ability to produce ketones and be effective in burning fats has been switched off for many, many years because of all the sugars in our diets. And my recommendation is going and trying a ketogenic diet for an extended period is good to switch that back on. I certainly did that at sort of at a midpoint or crisis point, if you like, in my personal weight loss journey. But now I believe that I am metabolically flexible, that I can switch between the two and choose to do so where I can rely on fats predominantly, but I can use carbs effectively when I need to. And there's been good science. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go into the details, but follow anything by Tim Noakes, and he'll tell you about the role of ketones and the ability to work with ketones in sporting events, etc. Once you are adapted. There was one group of scientists, sportsmen, I can't remember their names. I've got their papers somewhere in storage here, but you can probably look at it. They did this 2 years apart. The first thing they did was a cycle. So basically, they did a 5-day fast. So they stopped eating on the Sunday evening completely. And from Sunday night to Friday night, all they had was water, black coffee, and where required some electrolytes. And they cycled 100 miles a day. And then they measured all their blood markers all the way. And they were all fine. They were in fact better than fine. They were fantastic. They burnt ketones. They were high ketone bodies. But the point to note is that prior to this, they had been keto adapted for at least a year, all of them.
Yeah, because someone who's not keto adapted and tries that is going to have a hell of a time.
Absolutely. And then they did the same process again a year later where they ran a marathon every day for the 5 days, completely fasted. Just to show that the body, if it's ketone adapted, can perform equally well on ketones without carbs. We do not have to have carbs. But I go back to that warning. They were keto adapted. Their bodies were very, very happy breaking down the fats that they had and energizing that sort of energy expenditure. So I'm not recommending that as something to go out and do. I'm showing that as evidence that we can, if we're properly adapted, utilize it.
I think that's an important point, that the person, like, even if you are competing, I think that moving toward a ketogenic or at least a low carb dietary lifestyle is healthier versus a high carbohydrate diet. and just to be mindful that there is an adaptation period, and that period will vary from person to person. It's not like a set thing, but if we were to take a ballpark figure, we could say somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks, roughly, give or take, to allow yourself the time where you are going to have energy dips and you are potentially going to get a bit of keto flu and feel a bit lousy and have a bit of a struggle before you then get to the other side of that and you then experience the benefits like these cyclists and runners that you've just spoken about, where performance is not hindered at all. And in fact, you're performing perfectly well without needing to carbo load and have a meal before the exercise and so on and so forth. So just
this
be
isn't
mindful.
just about sport, by the way. That's just an example.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
no,
about
for
health,
sure.
right? It's about health. It's about maintaining your inflammation. Because remember, glucose is inflammatory. All the things you spoke about earlier, ages, etc. So we've spoken about calorie counting. We've spoken about keto diets. I'm not going to give a whole breakdown of keto diets. That's not the point of today. If you're going to follow a keto diet, which will be one of our 3 recommendations to choose, there's a lot of research out there on how you can get yourself keto adapted and what you can do and what you can eat, etc. So I'm not going to go into that sort of diet now. So the next thing I want to talk about is intermittent fasting. And intermittent fasting, again, has subgroups. So you'll hear people talk about time-restricted eating, alternate day fasting, etc. So I just want to touch on what we're talking about, all of those, and I'll give my thoughts on that. So I think the first time we really heard people talking about intermittent fasting was things around the 5-2 diet. And I have heard 5-2 diets discussed in both ways, in terms of some people define it as fasting 2 days a week and eating for 5, and other people talk about it as fasting for 5 days a week and eating for 2, right? So either way, it's a 5-2 diet. But the idea behind the 5-2 diet was that you would eat, if we go with 5-2 as being the fasting days being 2 days, you would eat less than 500 calories a day on 2 days of the week, and you would eat as normal for the other 5. All right.
Yeah.
You take that back to calorie counting, we said earlier. You're not counting calories, but if you're eating the same as normal for 5 days and you're eating only 500 calories a day for 2 days, you are eating substantially less calories over a 7-day period, right?
Deficit. Yeah.
So that's a 5-2 diet. Typically, alternate day fasting is the exact same principle, but just as the name says, alternate day. So you would eat normally one day, you would fast the next day.
Yeah.
And then you get time restricted eating, which basically means that you eat within only a certain time window each day, or on days that you choose to do. The evidence would suggest that a 16-hour fast is optimal for health. In other words, you eat in the 8-hour window. If you like, am I right? 16 and 8, 24?
Yeah, that's right. 16 minutes.
Right. So you basically would fast. Obviously, part of that fasting period is your sleep period as well, your sleep time. So you're fasting within that. So all of those are intermittent fasting protocols, and they can be mixed and matched, and they can be put together in different ways. And the key thing here with adapting something like an intermittent fasting protocol is you don't have to dive into it head first and day one. So the first thing that I would recommend, so when I talk to people about implementing an intermittent fasting protocol, we always start on a ramp up. So my ramp up to people generally is start off by saying you're going to do an intermittent fast 2 days a week. Call it Tuesday and Thursday. You need to match this to your lifestyle and things fit you. But let's, for the sake of simplicity, say you're going to do an intermittent fast on a Tuesday and Thursday. And my suggestion is that on the Monday night and the Wednesday night, you stop eating no later than 8 o'clock in the evening. So you have your last bit of food before 8 o'clock in the evening on the Monday and the Wednesday. And then you don't eat again until you end your fast on the Tuesday and the Thursday. And you can work up to that 16 hours. You're not expected to dive into that. So if you're someone who's used to having breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, you would make your intermittent fasting try and go till 10, maybe 10:30 on a Tuesday and a Thursday for the first week or two. Then move 10:30 to 11:30. until that becomes comfortable. Then 11:30 to 12:30, and before you know it, you'll be able to go all the way till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So stop eating at 8, and don't eat again until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Which then begs the question: but breakfast is the best meal of the day, or the most important meal of the day?
No,
Great
that's a
marketing
Kellogg's
message.
bloody marketing slogan.
All right, okay, but let's take that reel that back just a little bit on that, because actually breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But let's think about what we're talking about when I use the word breakfast. All right.
Yes.
The origins of the word, breaking your fast. All right.
Yeah.
So breakfast is not the meal that's associated to a specific time of day. It's simply the first meal that you have when you are breaking your fast. So if you're fasting till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that first thing that you eat at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's your breakfast. That's when you're breaking the fast. And that is really important. So let's bring this all back into, because all these things tie up. All right. So what for me is the success of successful intermittent fasting? Firstly, and this applies not just to your fast days, but to all days, the first thing that you eat, the way you break your fast, should be savory. All right. Throw away the Kellogg's cereal, get rid of the cornflakes. All right. Get rid of the high sugar products. Remember what we said earlier about we being triggered to eat more, to be hungry when we eat sugars? We need to make sure that we don't break our fast on sugars, because that's immediately going to put us into a feasting state.
Yeah.
And we're going to want to overeat when we break our fast. So your first meal of the day should be savory. Yes, I'm a big believer in eating whole fruits, but don't break your fast on fruit. That's sugar. All right.
Yeah.
What should you be breaking your fast on? Well, I will never fault a good bacon and eggs personally.
I was about to say bacon and eggs. They're your best friend.
All right. But something like that, but it doesn't have to be bacon and eggs, as long as it's not the traditional breakfast, and as long as it's not sweet. An omelet's a great way to break a fast as well. Okay. For those that really want to, you can break your fast on a steak.
There we go.
They want to, and we can afford to. All right. So break your fast on something that's savory. And the other thing that's quite important, especially when you're getting used to an intermittent fasting, is make sure that last meal that you eat before you start your fast, so the last meal that you eat before 8, again, make sure that doesn't contain carbohydrates. Again, a repeat of the whole same thing. Carbohydrates make you hungry. So why would you eat carbohydrates before you're going to have an 18 or 16-hour fast? All right, because even if
unless
it's before bed,
unless you're a sadomasochist and you just want to like torture yourself a bit, then
that's a whole different podcast. All right. Okay. Yeah. So those last meal before the fast, first meal after the fast, whatever your timings are, make that savory. If you're going to have carbohydrates, have them in the middle there somewhere. And we're going to talk a little bit about trying to make those complex carbohydrates and not simple carbohydrates. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So I'm a very, very big believer in intermittent fasting. My personal regime, I do a 24-hour fast from Sunday night to Monday, mainly because I pretty much overindulge on things that I shouldn't be eating, according to myself, over the weekend. And Monday just completely resets everything with a 24-hour fast. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I don't eat till between 12 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On most of those days. I am fortunate in that I've been following my own lifestyle, my diet lifestyle, for many, many years, which means that I have some flexibility. So yeah, if it's really, really hot and I want an ice cream at 12 o'clock on a Wednesday, I will do that.
Dangerous game.
All right.
It's a dangerous game to play.
But so I won't have it
do
just
you
before
eat
bedtime.
2 meals? So you talk about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're eating on average 2 meals a day. Then you're eating a lunch in the early afternoon and then dinner.
Yeah. So weirdly, I've kind of I don't optimize that for myself, and that's just because of, I suppose, normality and what you're used to when you have kids. We're used to having a main meal as the evening meal. As a family, and when we feed our family and all of that. Ideally, I would prefer to have my main meal as my lunch meal at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then just a light snack in the evening. I don't do that because we've never done that. But well, I'm fortunate now. That depends on what you call fortunate. My 2 eldest have moved out already. and my daughter, who's sitting to my left here, at the moment is at university, so she's home at the moment for the summer. So we've gone back to having a bigger meal in the evening. But while she was at university and it was just my wife at home, we tended to eat a much smaller, lighter meal in the evening, and have my main meal in sort of midday, as a meal. And for me, that feels better, but it doesn't really fit into family life in terms of tradition, So you obviously have to match things. And the other nice thing about doing an intermittent fast, the way I've discussed, just starting off by 2 days a week, also gives you the nice flexibility to fit in with life, right? So if you're doing a fast on a Tuesday and a Thursday, but Wednesday night you've been invited to a work function, or you've been invited out to friends for dinner, or whatever it is, you don't want to go, oh, I'm not going there because I'm doing my intermittent fast. All right. Move the intermittent fast from Thursday to Friday. Enjoy Wednesday night. It gives you that flexibility. So I would, if you're going to try intermittent fasting, I like the time restricted eating, and I like the idea of building up towards it. I don't think you should dive in and give yourself the windows to work with. So when we define our 3 rules, you'll see our 3 options. You'll see that intermittent fasting comes into that. Next point that I had there was low-fat diets. So low-fat diets, we've kind of discussed around it quickly, in terms of the fact that we've removed that thing that makes us feel full from our diet, and generally low-fat foods have been replaced with sugars, which are harmful. So a low-fat diet, as much as we've been signposted towards it for years, ever since Ansel Keys beat Yatkin in a boxing fight, essentially. And I think we've spoken about this on previous podcasts. So I'll let your viewers Google Keys versus Yatkin, and have a look at that. But from a weight loss point of view, if you've got the willpower and you think you can do it, stripping out or reducing the fats in your diet, because there are more calories per gram of fat, it might work for you. It's not something I would recommend. I think it's a struggle for most people, but I don't want to tell you that it's the worst thing in the world. If you've got the willpower to do it and not overeat as a result, and body composition is kind of really what you're looking to do, then something to consider. But I would just be very careful. We use fat for lots of things. I don't know how many people I've heard say to me in one sentence, I don't know what the problem is. I've been really healthy. I've been following this low-fat diet, but my testosterone levels are really, really low. Well, guess what, folks? What do you think your body uses to make testosterone? Fats, right?
Cholesterol.
Testosterone is a fat-based hormone. All right, it's made from cholesterol. Cholesterol it requires fats, healthy cholesterol levels. All right, so yes, if you're on a low-fat diet and you're male, potentially your testosterone levels are going to go through the floor. All right, and other hormones. And for females, lots of female hormones also fat-based. So, from a health perspective, I'm not a fan of low-fat diets, and I'm mentioning it because it's out there, but it's certainly not what I would recommend. So then that brings us on to this idea of ultra-processed foods. And again, you can read Van Tulleken book. There's lots of terms out there on ultra-processed foods, but I really just thought maybe it'd be worth sharing with the people just a bit of a history of, because the first real ultra-processed food that hit our diet was margarine, and I'll talk about that now, but just want to say something that is important. Humans are the only species on the earth that have evolved to exclusively eat processed foods. Not exclusively, predominantly eat processed foods, okay? We have lost, over time, a huge amount of time, the ability. So eating raw food like a lion or something, we are not perfectly clued up for that, okay? We cannot eat wheat as it grows out the ground, right? We have evolved to eat a large amount of our foods through processing. Cooking is a process, all right? So the problem isn't just processed foods, it's ultra-processed foods, all right? It's when we actually have to completely reformulate in a lab, potentially, and these things, the food that we're eating, all right? So seed oils for me are a great example of that. Often people say to me, so how come you say that rapeseed oil or any of the other seed oils are bad for you, but you're pro olive oil. Olive oil is good for you. So let me just give you a very simple just think of that. If you take a whole bunch of olives and you press them, you squeeze them, you will get the olive oil out of the olives, all right? Even if you just leave a bunch of olives in the sun, you will get a pool of olive oil out of it. And the reason for that is olive oil comes from the fruit of the olive.
Yes, it's a fruit oil. It's not a seed oil. Yeah.
Absolutely. You can take as many sunflower seeds or rape seeds as you like, and you can stack them up and squeeze them as hard as you can. You will never get vegetable oil out of a vegetable seed. All right. It's a complex chemical heat-based process that's required to produce oil out of a seed. It is not natural. All right. And all of that comes from the process that gave us margarine. So here we go, Ricky. Here's your trivia question for this episode. What technological advancements in America predominantly led us to eating margarine?
I'm going to say it would have to have been something to do with lubricating machinery.
Nope, it was the electrifying of America, right? It was putting lights into all the houses. Why? Because before electrification, the predominant source of light at night was candles. And candles and soap were the two biggest uses of cottonseed oil.
Okay.
So the cottonseed, at this stage in America, cotton production was being replaced. So the cotton itself being spun as a material was losing its value. But there was massive value in harvesting the cotton seeds, which could then be pressed and processed to form cottonseed oil, which was being used to make candles. But Procter and Gamble, the company that was the biggest manufacturer of both soap and candles in America, realized that as houses were becoming electrified, there was going to be less and less requirements for cottonseed oil to make candles. But they did realize they worked out how to hydrolyze this, and they came up with a product that looked really similar to butter. All right. And they marketed. So what I'm going to do quickly, if it's okay with you, I'm going to
please do.
Share my screen quickly. So share screen. And I'm going to just read you through this little bit here. I'm not going to read through the whole article. It's a long article. I'll let your customers use it. But here's the story quickly. So it's the story of Cresco, which was the company that first produced the edible version of what became margarine. So the story of Cresco begins innocently enough in pre-Civil War America when candle maker William Procter and his brother-in-law soap maker James Gamble, so Procter and Gamble, joined forces to compete with 14 other soap and candle makers in Cincinnati, Ohio. Procter and Gamble entered the shortening business out of necessity. In the 1890s, the meat packing monopoly controlled the price of lard and tallow, which was previously needed to make candles and soap. So P&G took steps to gain control of the cottonseed business from farm to factory. By 1905, they owned 8 cottonseed mills in Mississippi. In 1907, with the help of German chemist E.C. Kaiser, Procter & Gamble developed the science of hydrogenation. By adding hydrogen atoms to the fatty acid chain, this revolutionary industrial process transformed liquid cottonseed oil into a solid that resembled lard. Not content with using hardened cottonseed oil for soap, and mindful that electrification was forcing the candle business into decline, P&G looked for other markets for their new product. Since hydrogenated cottonseed oil resembled lard, why not sell it as a food? The new product was initially named Crispo, but trademark complications forced them to change the name. I'll drop where you can read the best there, but then when Crisco was introduced to the public in 1911, it was an era when wives stayed at home and cooked with plenty of butter and lard. The challenge for Cresco was to convince the stay-at-home housewife about the merits of this imitation food. Procter & Gamble's first ad campaign introduced the all-vegetable shortening as a healthier alternative to cooking with animal fats and more economical than butter. So with one sentence, P&G had taken on its two closest competitors, lard and butter. P&G's next step was a stroke of genius that published and gave away a cookbook, The Story of Crisco, which looked like most other cookbooks. It was given away for free, by the way. of the era, but there was a difference. All of its 615 recipes, anything from lobster bisque to pound cake, contained, you guessed it, Cresco. And I won't keep on reading, but Cresco then became margarine and introduced trans fats, which are highly toxic, into our diets. So ultimately, Thomas Jefferson and his electric light bulb is what forced us into the ultra-processed food world that we live in today. Okay. So there was no health research done to bring polyunsaturated seed oils into our lives. It was a purely economic decision by Procter and Gamble to save the cottonseed industry, and then cottonseed eventually evolved into sunflower seed and rapeseed and all the other seed oils that we have in the market, which are full of omega-6s. I'm not going to go into all the details now. Omega-6s per se aren't necessarily bad for us, but our bodies are designed to have omega-3s and omega-6s in a 1-to-1 ratio. Our diets with all these seed oils are hugely, hugely rich in omega-6s. We don't eat enough fatty foods, particularly fatty fish, which contains the really good and healthy omega-3s for us. So instead of having a 1-to-1 ratio, we're at 25-to-1, 36-to-1, 50-to-1 in some cases. So it's that imbalance that is potentially really harmful to us. But I'll go all the way back to my opening statement. You can't squeeze oil out of a seed. You can squeeze oil out of an olive. You can't squeeze oil out of a seed. It has to be chemically processed in order to do that. So the ultra-processed foods are really part of this hyper-inflammatory state that we're getting into. So I'm really conscious of time. So what I want to do is really try and bring this. I've got a few other notes over here, but let's get it down to our three options, because we said what we really wanted to do was leave the listener with 3 options that they could look at, which will help them improve their nutrition. And they can choose one of the 3 or all 3, and start from there. So here's my rule of 3, or my 3 nutrition takeaways. And I would advise every one of the listeners who's starting on a metabolic health journey, choose one of these 3 as a starting point and make your decision to progress with that. So what are the 3? Look at a ketogenic / low carb diet as an alternative way of eating. Again, we're not going to cover the details of that now. I think you do in some of your other podcasts, but there's plenty of advice online. But look to go to a keto and low carb diet, build up towards it. So bring out the carbohydrates from your diet until you've got yourself in that point, and stay on that diet until you are fat adapted and you feel the energy benefits. Look at it as a 1-year plan, and then look after that to be able to bring back your carbohydrates in small amounts, and then embrace the enjoyment of being metabolically flexible. That's option number 1. Look to adopt a keto / low carb diet. Option number 2, intermittent fasting. Exactly as we've discussed it now. Choose the kind of intermittent fast, the alternate day, the 5-2, the time restricted eating, whichever one you think initially fits your lifestyle best. And again, you don't need to jump in with an 18-6 fast or a sub 500 calorie fast. Build up to it. Set yourself up to it and build up to it. And again, there's loads of advice online as to how you can make these adaptations. But set yourself a plan and just increase the fasting period bit by bit over a period of a couple of weeks, and you'll adapt into it. And the third option to look at is just to cut out ultra-processed foods from your diet. All right. If you can turn around as step 3 and say sweets, chocolates, snacking, or anything that is ultra-processed or contains highly refined carbs, cut that out of your diet Monday to Friday. All right. That's the starting point. So you're not going to deprive yourself of it forever. Monday to Friday, that's your willpower point. And then enjoy the weekend. And again, you can build to that. All right. So you don't have to do that Monday to Friday. You can say, right, I'm going to cut out all ultra-processed foods for a Monday. And then it's going to be Monday and Tuesday. And then when I'm comfortable with Monday, Tuesday, it'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and build up to 5 days. I've just got something here. Again, I'm going to share my screen very, very quickly. Share, and I'm just going to open up this little picture over here. So this is just a very basic little thing that I've got over here, just to give people an idea of what I'm talking about. So this just breaks up carbs into 3 different groups. So leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, which is your broccoli, Brussels, etc., and berries are probably the better complex carbs to have. Good carbs they've got here are moderate, so starchy veggies, sweet potatoes, peas and carrots are very starchy as well. The sweeter fruits, but the bad carbs, the stuff that I'm saying you should try to cut out from the Monday to Wednesday, are even the bottom two groups here. So the sugary drinks, sodas, and fruit juices. Fruit juices are not a health drink, and all the sugary snacks, cookies, and candies. All right. Again, from a strictly carb/keto point of view, the grains and the rices and the breads would also come out. But from this rule number 3 that I'm referring to, I'm just talking about the 2 bottom items in that group over there. So the sweetened drinks, the sugary drinks, and the snacks. So there's my 3 options that I really want to leave everybody with today. Choose one of the 3. You don't have to do all 3, and it's not an all or nothing thing. It's a start and gradual and build and fit it into your life. So consider a keto low carb diet. Consider an intermittent fasting regime. Consider cutting out ultra processed foods Monday to Friday.
I love it. Good stuff. And just my one point that I would add to that is, for people who are not ready to go down the route of low carb ketogenic just yet, an alternative starting point they may consider is to swap out the ultra processed sweet stuff with fruit. So moving from ultra processed towards whole food, keeping the sweet stuff, because fruit is nature's candy. That's a brilliant way to think about it. Dr. Lustig, I think, was the person who I heard coin that phrase, fruit is nature's candy. And if you use fruit as candy, as a pudding, as a dessert, as a treat, as a sweet thing, then you're still getting your hit of sweetness that you're after, but it's not the ultra-processed, pro-inflammatory, man-made garbage. It's a better alternative.
Just don't confuse fruit with fruit juice. Fruit, yes. Fruit juice, no.
Yes.
Very important.
Yes, good point.
There's a great scientific explanation about that. I don't want to go into it. It's not necessary. Eating whole fruit. Yeah, and again, and then also all fruit aren't equal. So
correct.
My advice, if you're going to go fruit, berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, those are the preferred ones. Apples and oranges, etc., less so if possible. So try and go with the berries and that food group first if you can. Remember what I said. Make sure the first meal across all of these, make sure the first meal of your day is a savory meal. Can't emphasize that enough. So lay off whichever one of these eating plans you choose to. Stay away from something sweet as the first thing that you eat. Remember, breaking your fast isn't a time of day. It's just the first thing that you eat after an extended period of not eating. And then just to trail, obviously, our final episode, which we will go to next, which will be episode 4. We're going to combine physical activity and recovery, and we'll create 3 simple options for each of those, as well as a takeaway. And that'll be the completion of this deep dive series. So we'll be recording that next.
Superb. Well, Neill, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure once again. Looking forward to the next one, mate.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the episode. I hope that you found the conversation meaningful and informative, and I hope that it has empowered you with some tools and insights that you can take to tweak and improve your own lifestyle approach in pursuit of optimal metabolic health outcomes. If you've enjoyed the episode, and if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd like you to do me the kindness of please subscribing to the channel, giving it a like, maybe even giving it a share. Help to raise awareness and get the podcast in front of as many viewers as possible, because it is my passion to try and help as many people as possible to understand more of the nuance around metabolic health and how to tweak their lifestyle in pursuit of optimal outcomes. Also, if you have any constructive feedback, things that you think I could improve on, any critiques, any criticisms, please do feed them back. I give you my solemn word that I will take them seriously, and I will, to the best of my ability, work to improve and to give you a more refined and more targeted product as a result of your feedback. So I will take it seriously, and I'll do what I can to improve the show. But again, thank you very much for watching. Keep thriving.